The world of comic books is one of unlimited possibilities, and with today's highly advanced CGI and special effects, movie makers do a pretty good job of replicating even the most amazing on-page antics. But some comic book components don't successfully make the transition from the page to the screen, with physical appearances being a big one. And this can happen for many different reasons: budgeting reasons, creative differences, or the fact that the comic book look is just a little, well, goofy. The bottom line is, some iconic capes, cowls, tights and weapons are sometimes added or left out, making our favourite heroes and villains look very different. Welcome back to The Binger everyone, and today we're going to be looking at how some of our favourite Marvel characters look different in the movies when compared to the comics. For this comparison, we are looking at the most famous and iconic incarnations of the characters in the comics. And as there is a vast landscape of movies out there, we're just going to be focusing on the key live-action releases that had the biggest impact. So think more 2016's Deadpool rather than 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. The less said about that one, the better. We start off with a superhero that has been given the live-action movie treatment several times. However, costume-wise, each outing has stayed pretty loyal to the source material. Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man movie recreated the red and blue suit in stellar fashion, and certainly made it look cinematic and modern. The big discrepancy with this costume, however, was the web shooters, or lack thereof. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man saw Peter Parker's web shooting abilities become part of his genetic mutation, after being bitten by a radioactive spider. In the comics, however, Peter actually designs his own wrist-mounted web shooters. And that iconic rock and roll style shape he makes with his hands is simply a way for him to press a button to fire said web shooters. This may be more of a functional thing rather than visual, but it does add an extra design element to the costume. This can be seen in the Amazing Spider-Man series of movies, which has Peter designing the shooters himself. A small difference, but visible nonetheless. The other big addition came with Tom Holland's Spidey in the Avengers franchise. As well as having a super high-tech suit, which is true to some of the later comics, his suit also featured web wings. Yes, those cobweb things under his armpits. And these date all the way back to Spider-Man's very first appearance in Amazing Fantasy number 15, so it was awesome to see them make the leap to the big screen. Although functionality-wise, did comic book Spidey ever actually use them to glide? Feel free to debate that in the comments below. Yes, the trusty Cap, Steve Rogers, poster boy for the Avengers. And the most famous incarnation of his suit is no doubt from the MCU, which sees it evolve subtly over the course of 5 films or so. But how does it compare to the comics? Well, similar to Spider-Man, the main colour scheme is there. However, MCU Cap clearly leans more towards a soldier than the colourful comic book character. Yes, Cap's costume in something like Civil War features a large star on the chest, a striped theme, and of course that iconic shield. But being a soldier who needs to be ready to do battle, the comics' flared boots, gloves and head wings are noticeably left out. Although as a nice homage, they can be seen in Captain America the First Avenger during Steve Rogers' awkward stage performances. Now they would be awesome pyjamas. Overall, Cap's MCU costume is a much deeper shade of red and blue, with armoured padding and tactical belt straps dotted all over. He even gets a practical chin strap for his helmet, and you can see his costume becoming more withered as the story goes on, even to the point of losing the star on his chest. Clearly, creators in the MCU took a few liberties here, making him look more realistic and practical. I mean, imagine how dirty that comic book costume would have gotten when fighting off droves of enemies from Hydra. Taking over the MCU with both his power and presence, Thanos instantly became a fan favourite. Thanks to those famed end credit sequences, we've been aware of how Thanos' live-action get-up was going to play out for quite a while, although it has changed slightly since his first MCU appearance. In his first outing, Thanos arguably appeared closer to the Thanos of the comics, purple skin and prominent gold armour. Although the armour is a little bulkier than the comic book version, and the helmet is not attached to the neckplate. Later in the MCU, however, his appearance changed. That purple hue grew a little duller, veering more towards blue, and much to the dismay of fans, he didn't sport his trademark armour for very long. But come on, we can't hate on Josh Brolin's Thanos too much. The guy knocks it out of the park. Okay, so it's a bit of a running joke that Hawkeye isn't the most exciting character in the MCU, but what Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye lacks in dynamism and cool weaponry, he makes up for with his costume. Hang on. Well, actually, he doesn't, and that's kind of the point. In the comics, Hawkeye has a pretty substantial costume, suited and booted from head to toe in a rather full-on blue and purple outfit. This costume also features a mask with distinctive flares attached to the eyes and a giant H right in the middle. The movie version of Hawkeye couldn't be further from its colourful counterpart. Whereas the MCU's Hawkeye also features a bow, of course, and some archery-inspired clothing and protective gear, his Avengers suit is quite subdued. The vibrant purple and blue make way for black, highly functional armour and straps. There is a hint of purple in his costume later on, but nowhere near as flamboyant as in the comics. He wears a vest sometimes though. That's something, right? Choosing one Iron Man suit to focus on from the comics is pretty difficult. The Tony Stark of the comics and of the MCU has had countless suits. But for most of us, the most recognisable will be the Mark III Iron Man suit, which first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 66, around 2 years after Iron Man's first comic book appearance. It features the instantly recognisable red and gold colour scheme, lightweight construction, noseless, visor-like helmet, and most importantly, hand-mounted repulsor rays. Ultimately, this suit was the next big step for comic book Iron Man, and the film actually follows suit. Pardon the pun. As mentioned, in the MCU, Iron Man's suit changes a lot. But in 2008's Iron Man, the movie that kicked off the MCU, Stark is seen suiting up in the Mark III suit after refining various versions of it. And it looks pretty similar to the comic book version, with a bit of movie magic sprinkled over of course. A big difference between these suits however is the glowing circular chest-mounted arc reactor, an addition to the movie version of the suit which actually becomes a big plot point. Another big difference is the suit's construction. In the comics, it is noticeably more primitive, and Tony can be seen slipping the steel mesh armor on like normal clothing, although the gloves do feature hidden retractable arm coverings. The movie version is much more high-tech, with layers of overlapping armored plates made from a nickel titanium alloy called nitinol. Overall, the parallels are clear, although 21st century Stark adds more bells and whistles than a Swiss Army knife from the future. Let's move away from the famed MCU for a moment and look at everyone's favourite claw-bearing short-fused mutant. Like many other comic book characters, Wolverine's physical appearance is instantly recognisable on the page. Yellow and blue suit, retractable claws, and flared eye helmet ear things. But the movie version is radically different. Let's start with his height. In the comics, Wolverine is said to be 5'3", but in the movies, Hugh Jackman is 6'2". Suit-wise from the off, it's pretty clear in the movies that Jackman's Wolverine is a little more, well, realistic. He sports a leather jacket most of the time, but when he is in costume, even for the X-Men, what he dons is quite dark, although it does have some very subtle coloured piping. Jackman's Wolverine does retain the retractable adamantium claws however, and the filmmakers even styled his hair to replicate that of the comics. Actually, his hair kind of doubles up to replicate the helmet aesthetic too. We did see a version of the famed yellow suit in a deleted scene from 2013's The Wolverine, but that didn't really go anywhere. Besides, we think it would kind of kill the relatable modern day feel of Jackman's short-tempered anti-hero. However, it would have been cool to see him wear the slightly tamer flight suit from X-Men First Class. Seemingly born to play Thor just as much as Robert Downey Jr. was to play Iron Man, Chris Hemsworth has the look down to a T, flowing locks of blonde hair and a large domineering figure. But how close is his Thor to the comics? Well, the circular armour detailing on the costume is indeed true to the comics, as is his red cape. Yes, MCU Thor has been polished up and given some cinematic highlights, but the inspiration is clearly there. But wait, although the old school Thor costume is considered classic canon, his costume was revamped in 2007 in the comics, and it looks incredibly close to Hemsworth's MCU Thor. It even has sleeves. But the MCU's Thor is missing one quite significant thing: the helmet. In the comics, Thor is almost always wearing his iconic winged helmet, and to be fair, the MCU's Thor did wear it for a brief time in 2011's Thor. But apart from that, that's it. It has been said that Chris Hemsworth found it uncomfortable to wear too, so maybe that was the reason for its exclusion. It may make him slightly less accurate when compared to the comics, but his Thor is still pretty accurate. The difference between the comic and movie costume here is more functional than aesthetic, although it is hard to see any of the comic book Ant-Man costumes convincingly translating to the screen. Anyway, a recurring theme from the Ant-Man comics is the open-faced helmet, which can be seen all the way back in 1979's Marvel Premiere number 47. When putting together the costume for the Ant-Man movie, a lot of emphasis was put on realism. I know, shrinking someone down to ant size isn't realistic, But stay with us. The creators wanted to ensure that they got as much of the science right as possible. A big part of that was how a tiny human would breathe oxygen molecules too big for their lungs. Basically, the mask helped shrink those molecules down to size, hence the radically different helmet design. Losing the antlers on the helmet though was probably due to feature rather than function. The matter of striving for a closed suit also explains why the whole costume got a revamp to make it airtight. You can see the inspiration of the reds and blacks, but mostly the movie version is an original take on the costume. Yes, the latecomer to the MCU, and just to be clear, we are talking about Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel here. In a similar way to Tony Stark, Captain Marvel's suit has changed quite a few times throughout the comics. When Carol Danvers was Ms. Marvel, her costume consisted of a red upper body with blue gloves, blue detailing, and a mask. She also wore a black jumpsuit with a gold lightning bolt at some point, and various other iterations. It wasn't until she officially took up the Captain Marvel mantle from Marvel that she started sporting the red, blue, and gold suit we know today. It is a little confusing. In the Captain Marvel movie, however, we first see this costume in the teal and grey colour of her Kree jumpsuit, a nice nod to Marvel's old colours. But eventually, it is changed to match the red, blue, and gold colour schemes as she becomes a superhero. And at a glance, it looks pretty similar to the costume featured in 2012's Captain Marvel #1. However, comic book fans have been quick to point out some distinct differences. Of course, the movie version is much more armoured and padded, but aside from that, it doesn't feature the comic version's red sash around the waist and buttoned fastenings. We do still get the helmet to go with the costume though. Avengers Endgame will see her suit change yet again, however, with shinier highlights and gold-plated shoulder pads. Ultimately, the essence is there, but it's clear that the MCU flair has taken effect. So, which Marvel comic book characters do you think are drastically different in the movies? Are there any shocking or notable costumes we missed? Be sure to let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Binger for more awesome videos like this. See you next time.